Espinoza.
Here.
Sherelle Fuller. Here. Jenny Hagstrom.
Here.
Terry Pavicic.
Here.
Joanna Vasquez Drexler.
Present.
Nancy Kupka.
Here.
Scarlett O'Hara.
Here.
Jade Toledano.
Here.
Thank you.
We have a quorum. Let's stand for the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Good evening. I just want to remind the board members, because of the way that this is set up, if you're trying to get my attention or Dr. Thiele's attention, you may have to speak,
Yeah, please speak up and let us know.
because we can't see you. Okay, we're going to start with student perspectives.
Let's start with Jade. We have a little bit of background noise.
All right.
Go ahead,
Can
Jade.
everybody hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. So in the last couple of weeks since the boards met, school activities are starting up again, which is very exciting. We have band camp, drumline, color guard having their mini camps here on campus. I was in person the other day, and it was so nice to see the energy being brought back. Everybody was smiling, excited to be here, and it was really great. Those groups that I just mentioned are practicing because we got word that Friday Night Lights will be happening this year, and so we'll be getting home games for football, our first one being on August 27th, which is very exciting because I think everybody really missed having other people near them during the school year after the pandemic where everybody was very isolated. So everybody is working very hard to make sure that all students feel welcomed and safe coming back. Freshman and transfer student orientation is scheduled for next Monday at 4:30 here at North. Teachers and school leaders have been working very hard to make this possible. We are all very excited to do this. We want to make sure the freshmen and transfer students feel safe and welcome and informed when they're coming back. And before then, we also have another event called Trojan Palooza, a very fun name in my opinion, on Thursday, August 5th from 6 to 8, where it's going to be an open house type setup for people to be able to come in. If they RSVP, they get their schedules, they can check out their schedules, like how their classes are going to go from day to day. And they get to see the new renovations here in the building, including our commons, which are very nice. I had a great first experience, which is very exciting. And we're going to have the therapy dogs here, so I think that's the best reason. Also, the health office will be available to present or collect any physicals or vaccination records and answer any questions. And in terms of the next week, we also have vaccination clinics being hosted here at North. We have one tomorrow, and we also have one on Wednesday for the second dose of the last clinic. So with that, I'll give it to Scarlett.
Okay, so mine is going to be about two specific events. Some things happening at South before the start of the new year are orientation events for both the freshmen and sophomores at South. Tomorrow, August 3rd, the sophomores who were not able to attend in person at any point last year will be invited into the school, and they're just going to gain some exposure to the building, maybe feel a little bit more comfortable since they are sort of going to be in the same boat as the freshmen. And the goal of the event is to help their transition to be a little bit less stressful. And the other orientation event that South will be holding is on Saturday, August 7th. It's our Mad Dash for the incoming freshmen. At this event, the students are going to participate in 3 small group sessions, listen to a keynote speaker, and watch some skits that address rumors that you might hear about high schools and incoming freshmen. And they're also going to be able to ask questions to the leaders who are our juniors and seniors, and just hopefully gain a little bit more exposure and have some more information, and it'll help ease any of the worries that they have coming into high school. Thank you.
Thank you, Jade and Scarlett.
Thank you both. Okay, for tonight's reception of visitors, we're going to be bringing speakers to the microphone to speak on a first-come, first-served basis. Therefore, we ask that you complete the speaker's slip and submit it to Mrs. Nidak, our board secretary. The reception of visitors occurs in 2 stages. First, the public is invited to comment on anything the board is voting on tonight. Tonight, there is one action item where the administration is seeking approval of the return to in-person instruction plan approval resolution. This reception of visitors will occur after the administration presents the plan so that everyone in the audience is aware of the details before commenting. Comments on this single topic are limited to 20 minutes with no more than 3 minutes per speaker. Later in the evening, there will be an opportunity to address the board on anything concerning District 99. This reception of visitors may last up to 30 minutes with a limit of 20 minutes per topic, and again, no more than 3 minutes per speaker. Failure to comply with these guidelines or interruptions to the business of the board, such as shouting or the use of vulgar or threatening language to the board or other visitors, as well as removing your mask will, for the safety of our students, staff, community members present, and the board, result in me closing the reception of visitors portion of the evening and moving into closed session to discuss an employment matter, after which no action will be taken by the board. I also request that you face the board during your presentation. Finally, I'd like to thank the Downers Grove Police Department, as well as our own security staff, for being here again tonight. Thank you, gentlemen. Dr. Thiele?
Thank you, Dr. Kupka. As mentioned, we're going to start with the return to school plan, and then we'll take public comment on it before I ask the board to take action on it later this evening. All right, so since we met just a couple of weeks ago, we've received quite a bit of updated guidance from the CDC, IDPH, ISB, and DuPage County Health Department. Some of that guidance continued to come in today with updated FAQs from the Illinois Department of Public Health, IDPH, that was then reinforced in a meeting with the DuPage County Health Department. So it wasn't until about 4 o'clock today that I had the most up-to-date recent guidance. After that was all processed and updated, we updated the plan and posted it on our website today, so it's very possible that people in the audience or at home have not had a chance to see this yet. Board members were provided a copy of this in advance of tonight. As soon as I had it, I shared it with them. All right, so we've received quite a bit of updated guidance, and really the key two areas that this has come in is in the area of face coverings and masks, and in the area of close contacts, contact tracing, quarantine. So the mask guidance that was updated today at noon from the Illinois Department of Public Health mirrors the guidelines that were provided on July 27th from the Center for Disease Controls, which talks about universal masking in indoor settings where there is substantial and high transmission. I'll make a note for the board that the IDPH guidance that came out today was much more direct than this, and also didn't provide a pathway for how you get out of universal masking. The IDPH FAQ that was released today had a question of who should wear masks at school, and the response to that question was everyone, period. That's part of the recommendation I am bringing tonight, but we're also going with the, CDC talks about layered mitigations, and IDPH talks about how these guidelines still have local control as to how we move forward with them, where we have options to keep ourselves safe while moving forward. And we know that about 50% of students in DuPage County are fully vaccinated. I don't know the exact numbers for our own yet. We're still gathering that as we move close to school. About 68%, I believe, have had at least one dose of the vaccine. So, the CDC talks about these are the general guidelines, IDPH talks about these are the general guidelines, but we also have to take into consideration what we see here at school. We've run very successful vaccination clinics, as Jade pointed out. Thank you, you stole my thunder in a couple of slides. That we have clinics going on the remainder of this week, and so does the DuPage County Health Department. So what I'm trying to bring to the board is, remember, we're trying to get as close to normal as possible in our return. We still need to fit within the guidance and keep students and staff safe. So that's what tonight's presentation recommends. So I want to be very clear that we're providing a pathway to optional mask wearing, optional but recommended tonight, that reflects what I believe is the intent of the CDC guidance in a community that is like ours. So that's why we'll talk tonight about a pathway to that in times when we are no longer in substantial or high transmission. Our goal is to get us back to normal as much as possible, and we're celebrating the fact that we are getting pretty close, especially in comparison to last year at this time. Close contacts and quarantine. One of the key pieces that you're going to hear tonight is this updated mask guidance plays into close contacts and quarantine. If we follow the universal masking guidance, then close contacts are set at 3 feet, and the quarantine period for those that are unvaccinated is set at 10 days if they're a close contact. If we were to not follow the universal masking guidance, close contacts would be set at 6 feet, and we'd be at a mandatory 14 days of quarantine. So we as an administration are trying to get as close to normal, to balance the safety guidelines, and to try to keep kids at school learning as much as possible. And the plan that I'm bringing you tonight, we believe, kind of threads the needle of all of those things. So when we talk about universal masking in this guidance, it does lean towards schools being just universal mask guidance for now, right? And that we'll update you later. But they talk about in indoor settings that this differentiation can be made, that there's kind of a line in the middle with on one side low and moderate, and at the other substantial and high. And that's based on the number of cases per 100,000 people in the past 7 days in your county, is what the CDC outlines that as. I've put on the slide there, I know it might be hard to see for the board with the little screen up there, but it's also behind you where you could see it, is the trend for the last 2 weeks. And right now we're sitting at about 78 cases per 100,000 in DuPage County, which puts us in that substantial range. The guidance that we received today, or since the 27th, on July 27th from the CDC, was really talked about when you're in that substantial or high, that you move to universal masking. So all student, staff, volunteers must wear a mask when indoors. So it's still nice in the fact that when our students are outdoors, they're doing activities outside, if teachers take class outside, masks can come off. But when we're inside, they must be on. And then when the county drops below moderate, so below 50 cases per 100,000 or lower than that, then we move back to the plan we talked about at the last meeting before this guidance was released that outlines a pathway to you may. You know, if you'd like to, you can. It's recommended that if you're unvaccinated, you do, but we shift back to the families being able to control that risk more because we're now not seeing transmission rates so high in the county. So those are the key changes since the last time we met. I'm going to pause there and see, are there any questions from the board regarding any of that? Go ahead.
My question is why we need to use the whole county and why we can't use the five zip code demographic that we used in the second semester.
Yeah, so my default is to go with what the recommendation is from the CDC. We're also, although we're seeing increased cases right now, it's still a lot lower than what we were seeing before in the spring. My concern is varying, and the county numbers and our 5 zip code numbers, I checked them this morning, are very close to one another. My concern about going with just the 5 zip codes is that you could more greatly get quick swings in the numbers, better or worse. So, you know, my default, though, is to go with what the CDC says. If the board would like for me to consider, this is what we did last year. We started with what the CDC said, and then in discussions with the board, we chose to go to our actual community. But I'm always going to start with what the health guidance is by default.
Well, one of the things that you mentioned is that part of the concern is with the thousands of students in the buildings that the kids interact with every day, sort of with the acknowledgement or the caveat that kids are doing things outside of the school day where they, may or may not be wearing masks. And so it sort of seems like if your concern is the children, the kids that are in the district, in the building with them, that's our 5 zip codes. That's not DuPage County,
Correct.
as a whole.
I would entertain it if that's what the board would like to entertain. I mean, I'm like I said, I'm always going to start by default with what that CDC guidance is. But if the board would like to advise me to go in a different direction, like we did last spring, we can maintain that and monitor it as well. The only downside, I guess, data-wise, is that the county numbers are very easily accessible to people. You can just go to the CDC, you can go to the DuPage County Health Department, you can see what the numbers are for the county. For our 5 zip codes, you're kind of relying on us tracking that data. And we've done it in the past. I'm happy to continue doing it. But then, the only source of that information then becomes us tracking it and maintaining it. But, happy to do that, just like we did last spring.
I would just add 2 things. When you can get because I follow the zip codes on the Northwestern site. I don't know if you've been to that yet.
Yeah.
No, I didn't check it this morning. The last time I looked at it was last night, and they only had the dates. They only had the numbers through Friday, as is typical over a weekend. And I know they were at 48 point something.
48.6.
48.6. So did you check it today?
Yeah, but they're only through the 29th.
They're only through the 29th. So that's part of the problem is Northwest, we're relying on Northwestern, they're a little delayed. I personally I want to bring up 2 points. I personally prefer the county numbers because I understand the concern. My argument has always been that there's no curtain that falls outside of our zip codes. We have people coming in and out all the time, whether they're going to work or coming from work or going to sport, whatever. People are going in and out. The other thing I just wanted to bring up for our 2 new board members, in case you weren't aware of this, after the last surge, when we were coming down in our numbers, at the request of some board members at that time, we held meetings, we at least held 1 or 2 meetings at the drop of a dime to see what mitigation we could peel away. And that is an expectation, I think we all agree, going forward, that we may have to call special board meetings either to ramp up mitigation efforts or to scale back mitigation efforts so that we can be responsive as possible to the needs of our community. So I would just throw that out for you guys to be aware of that.
And I'm going to dovetail on that, Nancy, since you provided me an opening. The resolution that I'm recommending that the board passes tonight supports the plan as presented tonight or with any modifications we make at the table. And then just as the resolution did last year, it authorizes the administration to make changes as needed or to modify policy as needed based on responding to the pandemic in real time. If I'm making a significant change, I first need to contact Nancy. The board is giving her authority to consult with me and then make a change. And then at our next meeting, which could be an emergency or a more quickly scheduled meeting, I would then ask the board to support that action forward or modify or deny it, right? And that's how we worked last year. That's what the resolution this year kind of sets the terms for how we work forward through this year.
I'd suggest that we follow the county numbers. Just from a practical standpoint, it's the easiest thing for you to glob onto right now, given the fact that those numbers are pretty much paralleling what we're seeing in our zip code right now. If by chance, we get forward in this and we discover that there is some sort of discrepancy, this is certainly something that we could come back to if for some reason we feel like, hey, our zip codes have been pretty low compared to the rest of the county or something. I mean, that's something that we could, as a board, come back to. But I'd want to keep your work to a minimum at this point in terms of what you need to do to keep track of what have you. And there, I don't, since this is the CDC guidance on this, I don't see a strong reason right now to differ from that. But I'd like to reserve the option to come back to it if we do see some, a discrepancy. That make sense?
Currently, we're at 48.6, and they're at
I don't believe that's
80, they're at like
I'll pull it up real
79.
quick.
I mean, that's a difference.
I'm just going by what,
He's
I was
gonna-
going by
he's
what
gonna
Hank.
I'll double check the
Dr.
number
Keeley's
from
going to
today.
double check, because I mean, it may be different, but the 48.6 was, I think, from Friday, right?
It was from July 29th.
The other piece, and maybe we're going to talk about this later, but the other piece of this is, first and foremost to me is having the kids in class, and that we avoid remote at all costs. I don't see the masks as being a huge problem. So I'm wondering, we'd all like to not have the masks, but hopefully this surge passes. Hopefully by the time we start school, things are even getting better. But I don't see having to wear a mask as a huge detriment to our student learning until I hear a case otherwise. I don't see I'm not that caught up in it, I guess, and I'd also rather not have a situation where we're going 1 week masks, next week no masks, next week masks, then 2 weeks no masks, and it'd be, I think, for consistency's sake in getting people to comply with the requirements, it would make sense that we not bounce back and forth too much. And so we may want to take a look at that hard line too, that 50 line, and say, I mean, we need, and Hank and I have gone, last year we kind of back and forth, you got to draw the line somewhere, right? I'd like to see consistency as much as we can. So this is something I think that we can massage, and there can be some nuance to it as we go forward. But that's, so.
Just to provide the most up-to-date data, according to the Northwestern website, which does take time to update that data, what we started to do was pull it off of IDPH so we could track it in real time, and that's what we would do again, rather than rely on a third party, right? But just because it's easy to pull it, as of, it probably got updated this afternoon, so as of 8/2, the number of new cases 7 day per 100,000 population in those 5 zip codes, which are 60515, 60516, 60517, 60559, and 60561 is 74. So, and then I pulled this morning from IDPH for DuPage County, and it's at 70. So, I mean, to me, they're relatively close. Now, yes, we could end up in a situation where our 5 zip codes end up on one side of the line and the other 5, or the county ends up on the other, and it could be good or bad either way for what we want to see. Right. My default, though, is, I'm not seeing a huge discrepancy over the past week of those numbers. So, what's that?
No, I just wanted to look at that bottom line.
It's easily defensible to start with the CDC recommendation and then monitor that as we're going along.
If I was seeing a huge discrepancy right now and the county was at 80 and our 5 zip codes were at 20, I would likely be coming and saying, look, I don't think I can recommend starting there because they're so far apart, but they're within a few.
I would flip it around the other way as well.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Right. Yeah, if it was the other way, too.
If the county was at 20, but we were at 80, that's also something I'd want to talk about. So, but so long as the county numbers somewhat closely parallel what we're doing here in our zip codes, I don't see a reason to go against the CDC guidance on this.
Yeah, not yet. I mean, that's why that's my recommendation now. Yeah. I don't know if other members feel differently. I know you're down on the other side there. I want to.
Joanna was trying to say something. So Joanna, then Terry, okay?
Can you pull close to the mic?
Pretty much I'm agreeing with Mike. I think that we need the consistency. I think the masks on, the masks off. I think the kids become frustrated with that and they don't even know what to do. And I think wearing a mask is a very small sacrifice to make to be in school all the time. So that's the bottom line for me. And I think following what the CDC says is the way to go.
Chair?
I'm fine.
Into the mic, please.
Hello?
Yeah, there you go.
I know. I have a different mic, so that's why. I agree that we need to use the CDC guidelines rather than going back and forth between just our county and, our district and that. And I think we need to start with masks and see where we go.
Well, we might not start with masks
Well, or
because
whatever.
we could be reaching a peak right now, and before school starts, it could drop. I hope it does. That means that, that COVID is getting back under control, and maybe this Delta variant's getting under control. And hopefully the Friday before school starts, we're back under that substantial level, and we can come back even closer to normal like we had hoped when we had met the last time, right? But if we're not, then I think the prudent thing to do, according to the guidance and what the health experts and IDPH and DuPage County are telling us, is that if we're above that threshold, we need to universally mask until we drop below it.
And I think at this stage of the game, everybody has a mask kind of with them anyway.
And as we did last year, any of our new students will be, I think we put the order in today, so that any of our new students, incoming ninth graders or transfer students, we can provide them with the same masks that our students had last year so that nobody's kind of left out and doesn't have access to the same resources that we provided.
If a student lost a mask, they could get another one?
I don't know if we have enough to give everybody a new one. I think it's only new students that we ordered them for.
Yeah,
So.
we can always negotiate that, right?
We'll see how many requests come in. I'm sure students, have their own preferences as well, and maybe the one we're providing isn't their favorite either. So.
That's a good point.
All right. So, any questions on those changes
Any more?
that have come? Any other questions?
Jen, did you have anything else you wanted to say?
No.
Okay. Okay.
All right, so our plan looks really similar to the last time we met. We're excited to be back on an 8-period day with lunch in our brand new spaces. We're going to have outdoor seating if people want to take their masks off and eat outside. Although we found out today some of our furniture for the new construction, including our new spaces, is running slow. So we might have some temporary furniture in those spaces while we wait for the new and improved stuff, not even improved, just new stuff, to show up. So we started troubleshooting that issue today.
Since we're on lunches, so will there be any opportunity to eat inside like in bad weather, or will it all be eating outside?
No, most of the opportunities will be inside.
Okay, thank you.
So the way that would look is that students would go through the lunch line with their mask on, go to wherever they're going to sit, and then once they're seated, they could remove their mask and eat. And then if they're sitting within 3 feet of anybody, then we have to contact trace if somebody would become ill at that point.
That was a good point to this, remember, because we had an issue at the end of last school year where
At the end of
we
the
were
year,
allowing the students close to to get down to 3 feet, but that meant they had to quarantine because they were less than 6. So this is a significant change going to this year, which hopefully minimizes the number of students that would have to quarantine, because they don't have to quarantine unless they're within the 3 feet. Correct?
Yeah, and the quarantine at 6 feet had really nasty ripple effects throughout the rest of the school, especially because we had a remote option at that point. And to avoid the possibility of quarantining, students were just not coming to school at all, and they didn't want to end up quarantining from sports or activities. So it really, I fought with the health department a lot about, okay, this is something that on paper, in theory, appears like it would work, but in practice it's not serving us well. So we were very excited to see this possibility of getting down to the 3 feet, in what we're looking at here.
Well, thank you for that advocacy. That's a key piece to this, I think. It really is. So.
Is the plan still then that vaccinated students do not have to quarantine?
Yes, correct. So according to the CDC guidance, if a student is vaccinated, there's no contact tracing or quarantine. Or if they've tested positive for COVID and then recovered in the past 90 days. Both of those work interchangeably with one another. Really, when it comes down to getting everybody back and keeping everybody here, the most important thing on that slide is that people stay home when they're sick. That staff or students, really take that seriously. Families take that seriously. The more we can keep illness out of the school, the more it won't spread here, and the more we can keep students here and not have to worry about contact tracing and quarantining and all of those things. We're going to continue to promote and provide opportunities for students and staff to be vaccinated. I'm going to share some of those with you this evening. We'll continue to follow mask wearing based on that CDC guidance, based on transmission levels in the county, updating it each Friday. As we said tonight, we'll start with the county level numbers and monitor it and see what that looks like moving forward. Everywhere that we can, we'll maintain a distance of more than 3 feet as much as possible. I've already had conversations with several teachers that are trying to think about how to set up their rooms, how to set up activities, and really the good thought thing that we'll just keep sharing with everybody is just keep an arm's length away from everybody around you. That works out to be about 3 feet. And if everybody just kind of stays an arm length away as they're doing activities or things in the classroom, then they're not within the distance that we have to worry about contact tracing, right? So especially if you're spending a good deal amount of time with anybody, while the masking, it's wearing the mask, keeping the 3 feet away. When we drop down into the other levels, we'll expect that it's just keeping the 3 feet of distance.
Are we still going to do the hallway, one-way hallway, or is that?
No.
What's that, Nancy?
No.
I asked if we were still going to do the one-way hallway.
Yeah, we didn't do one-way hallways last year. We just felt with the way that our floor plans were, that it would actually cause people to actually have to spend more time in stairwells, which, are way more packed together than our hallways are. So we never did the one-directional hallways, and we won't this year. And especially with things like the commons and some of our new hallways that are there, it'll be a lot easier for students to spread out as they go from one side of the building to the other. As I said last time, and I guess it was a premonition of what was to come, guidance from federal, state, or local health officials could cause information to continue to change. So could an increase of illness here at school could result in the DuPage County Health Department telling us to change a certain practice in response to that. So that's kind of the plan, right? The plan is we're really close to back to normal, right? And as we talk administratively, we keep getting a lot of questions about what do we do? Last year we did this. What do we do now? And our first response is, well, what'd you do before the pandemic? Like that's where we start from. And then we really have 3 pieces of safety that are on top of that. Right now, the universal masking because of high transmission levels, that hopefully those will drop and universal masking goes back to a choice as to what you do with that. The next thing is contact tracing and then quarantining, which are required per the CDC, required per the DuPage County Health Department. We must comply with those orders. There's options as to how those happen, though, depending on if a family chooses vaccination or not. So it's far less restrictions than what we saw last year, and some more choice for families than what we saw last year. But this will continue to likely change as the school year goes on. We're still dedicated as much as possible to offer a normal learning experience, pre-pandemic style learning experience in our brand new beautiful buildings as much as possible. So any questions on that as a plan from board members? Not much has changed other than the masking piece since the last time we met. And the actual details on quarantine. All right, this is just a slide that reviews what we've said multiple times tonight on close contacts and quarantine. I wanted it pulled out as a single slide, though, so it'd be easy for families to find if they wanted to reference it. Nancy, it looks like you have a question.
Yeah, and I'm sorry I didn't catch it till now, but
Yep.
to be clear, if you've been vaccinated and you test positive, you will still quarantine.
If you are vaccinated and you show symptoms, you
Or
will,
test positive.
you
You'll
will need to
quarantine.
quarantine, yes.
You will just not quarantine if you're close contact.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, yeah. And I have a typo on the slide there. So CDC still defines a close contact who is not fully vaccinated. Well, they do, as 6 feet of an infected person, but we're able, with the mask wearing guidance, to reduce that down to 3 feet. Okay, so just to make sure that that's clear there. And then those who are vaccinated, those that have had COVID in the past 90 days, do not need to quarantine unless they have symptoms, right? Then obviously anybody who's sick is going home. You know, that's the key to keeping everybody safe. When we follow this new mask guidance, quarantine is 10 days without symptoms. If they have symptoms, then they have to follow a longer quarantine practice.
And if you're a close contact to a person who's already been vaccinated, you will have to quarantine, if you are not vaccinated.
So yeah, if a vaccinated person has symptoms and tests positive, and you were a close contact to that person, and you were unvaccinated or did not have COVID in the last 90 days, then yes, you would need to quarantine. And the fact that I know that off the top of my head is scary. All right, as Jade pointed out, we have a vaccination clinic here tomorrow through Walgreens. It's up on our website. We tweeted it out and put it on Facebook and Nextdoor. Students can still sign up for that today and show up here tomorrow and get their first dose. And then for those that were part of our Koto Care clinic last month, their second dose is on Thursday. And then DuPage County Health Department shared this other half of the slide with me today. It's hard to read there, but if you go to the DuPage County Health Department, they, right there under vaccinations, show you all of the options here. But I posted this and I'm calling it out because there's 2 opportunities here in Woodridge upcoming as well. So some local opportunities from the DuPage County Health Department Caravan, where you can go and get vaccinated at the sites where they're kind of roaming around the county, and you could get a vaccine from them. I think the Woodridge Public Library on August 4th. My eyes aren't as good as they used to be.
Yep.
And there's another one I thought in Woodridge. No, Westmont.
West Suburban Community Pantry.
Oh, yeah, and West, yep.
The West
On
Suburban
August 7th. Yeah.
Jefferson Middle School.
Yeah. That's in Naperville, though.
Oh, okay.
But there are
It's,
also
National Night
Westmont.
Out, an open house at the Westmont Police tomorrow night. So several opportunities in the neighborhood through DuPage County Health Department as well. All right, so I received a lot of questions after last month's presentation about what happens if somebody is from parents and students. So this was a piece that the community felt was missing in the presentation last month. So we want to make sure we brought it back and kind of closed that gap this month. So Gina's here to talk a little bit about this was in last month's presentation, and I'm circling it now to just call it out, that everything that Gina is about to share was in this bullet, but we didn't dive into the details of it last month. So this month we're going to kind of dive into the details of the fact that we've added additional supports and programming to help students remain successful even when they're out because they're sick or they're quarantined. Students being out for a duration of time is not unusual for us. You know, whether it be for flu or strep, whether it be on a string of college visits, or out because of a family reason, or mental health issues, or other physical issues, throughout the year, and this is something we've seen an increase of over the last 5 years, and that we have continued as an administration and a board to add additional resources and personnel, especially in CSSS, our Counseling Support Services, to respond to these kinds of student illnesses or reasons that they're out. We've increased those this summer and over the past year, knowing that you know, especially for some students at no fault of their own, they're just close to somebody who happened to be sick, that they might have to be out for a period of time. That we have supports for that. Students will continue to be provided instructional opportunities, help from their teachers, and will be provided an opportunity to learn. That being said, every student's plan for that is different because it depends on the courses they're taking, what the teacher is even teaching that week, what's going on. You know, a classroom, one of the things I used to teach was chemistry. There's certain weeks of the year where there's a lot of like information and, you know, notes and lecture and presentations and those kinds of things where you're gaining concepts. And the next week you might spend 5 days in a lab, right? The student that misses the week where there's a bunch of content and information, what I would provide them as a teacher would look very different than if they missed the next week when we were doing a lab all week, right? So I received a lot of questions from students and parents that want to know, like, what will happen when I'm out for 10 days? What will happen is that our teachers and educators will make a plan for you. And then you will be supported through that plan from our teachers and also our counselors and other variety of supports depending on what you as a student need. So Gina's going to provide an overview of the menu of things that we've added on top of those resources that are already there within our district that we'll be kind of picking and choosing and selecting from to make an experience for each individual student. Mike?
Just a point that occurred to me, 10-day quarantine means the maximum number of days that a student would miss school would be 8. So it will be 8 or less days missed. So 1 day is too many, but it's not, you're not going to miss 2 weeks of school.
Correct. And that's the key of going from 14 to 10.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. All right, Gina.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Seeley. As Dr. Seeley said, we have several supports that are new or additional. We've added supports this last year, and we're adding additional support for this school year. And I divided them into 2 areas, personnel and then other resources or programs. We are in the process right now of hiring student success coordinators. This is a new position for us. We are planning to hire 1 at each campus. The student success coordinator will work very closely with our interventionists. Last year we had a full-time interventionist second semester at South and a part-time at North. We are planning to add an additional interventionist at South, so we'll have 2, and then a full-time in addition to a part-time interventionist at North. And the student success coordinator will work very closely with the interventionists. They'll coordinate various resources and interventions for students, including students who may be receiving homebound students, including students who are quarantined. They'll coordinate those interventions working with counseling and student support services, with teachers, with students, with families. They will be the conduit between the school, the counseling, the teachers, and the students and parents. So that, we're really excited to be able to add those positions. We also increase social work support at both North and South for this upcoming year. We are again returning to having an additional agency nurse at each campus to assist with everything that they need to do related to quarantining, COVID, contact tracing, serving students. And we are adding additional FT as well. We had very deliberate choices in terms of adding FT to certain courses that were higher class sizes. We wanted to bring down the class size. We are adding 0.6, which is a little over half-time, 60% teacher here at North High School for our bilingual and EL students. The board may recall we added to South, we've added consistently the last few years for our EL and bilingual students. We're also adding an additional 0.1, so an additional resource period for our bilingual students at South. All of these new positions will be funded out of the ESSER ARP grant, which is a grant to enable schools to provide additional supports for students. And so all of these positions will come out of the grant for this year.
And just, if I can I just interrupt for a second, and correct me if I'm wrong, but for the benefit of our new members, just fortuitously prior to COVID, we had increased our support staff, our counselors, our psychologists, et
Social
cetera.
work.
Because we knew there was a need. So if you look at this, it says, well, is this really all we're going to do? But it's actually, we had just increased staffing a lot, just prior to COVID.
Yeah.
So, just wanted
This
to
is
get that.
huge, because we've consistently, over the last few years, added support to counseling and student support services, and we're continuing to add. So in terms of resources, we are in the process of redesigning our academic resource centers that will provide services, tutoring to students during the school day. So during lunch, study hall, those kinds of resources. We've also expanded our STRIVE program. Our STRIVE program has been in existence for more than a decade, and we added last year at South a STRIVE 2, a higher level to support students during COVID, and really saw some success with that. And so we're expanding that this year, and we'll continue doing that at South, but expanding that to North High School as well. Our PATH program, and I know we've spoken about that a few times, our PATH program we were unable to fully implement last year, and as the board may recall, the PATH program is supporting students in and out of school suspension. It's restorative in nature. It's designed to decrease suspensions and increase students, therefore, being in class. We have a curriculum for that. It's called the Why Try curriculum, and we're very excited to get that up and running fully this year. We have had teacher office hours last year, and that will continue into this year, which is synchronous in nature, and students can receive support from their students. We also are in progress in terms of our social emotional learning programming. We have groups working and attending conferences and then working to design curriculum for not just counseling and student support services, but for teachers to use in the classroom. So we have SEL collaboratives that are working on designing curriculum aligned to the framework, which is aligned to the SEL standards in the state of Illinois. And then we have paper, which the board has heard about before. We actually had that open for summer school students, and I was very pleased that some students were using it even in the summer. So we will continue with paper into this school year. We will be replacing anonymous alerts with a Safe to Help program. It's actually a state of Illinois system for schools. It's 24/7, 365 days a year, multiple modes to obviously report those kinds of things that are urgent, can report through text and phone and different models. And so that is completely funded by the state.
It's also an anonymous.
It is anonymous, absolutely. But it's provided by the state, so that's also good for us in terms of not needing to use district resources to support it. So these are not meant to be an exhaustive list of supports for students, but supports that are either changing, being added, or are new.
I got a quick question for you. So let's say I'm a parent of a freshman coming in, everything's new to me, and we get a month in and my child has had a close contact, has to quarantine. What should I expect to happen?
Yeah, you should first expect that you'll hear from our nursing department that close contact has happened, and then they'll contact trace in cooperation with the DuPage County Health Department, and then they'll provide you information on what the next steps are for you health-wise. And then shortly after that, you would hear from likely the counselor, and maybe in cooperation with our
Interventionist.
The interventionist,
Student
thank you.
success coordinators.
I'm starting to get my vocabulary confused. And putting forward a plan that has been developed in cooperation with the classroom teachers as to what your experience will be over the next 10 days. In advance, you should have already been connected to your teacher through Google Classroom and all of those other tools, as well as be aware of when their office hours are, which are a combination of in-person and virtual, although during the in-person time, a student that's on quarantine could remote into their teacher's office hours during that time. and get real-time help from them, during those office hours. Every teacher is expected to have a blend of in-person and remote opportunities, so that students can connect in whichever way on a normal basis, when they're not on quarantine, that they're most comfortable connecting with their teacher. So that would be the path going forward, and then it would be monitored by the group of support to make sure that you're being successful. And then when you come back, well, a lot of students will still continue to submit things. There's a lot of digital opportunities, and they'll stay on top of it as much as they can while they're outside of class, and then hopefully fold right back in when their time on quarantine is done, or time being sick, or whatever that is.
Thank you.
Other questions? For Gina, all right? All right, so any overall questions on the plan? Once again, tonight you're being asked to approve the resolution, which kind of takes this plan and says, as of today, this is what we're doing, and authorizes the administration to adapt that plan moving forward. Outline first, contact with Nancy for an emergency or an urgent issue, and then we put that response in place. The default would be to take it to the whole board at a public meeting like this with less substantial changes. And the board tonight is being asked to approve both of those things in the action. By default, by approving the resolution, you're approving the administration's plan at this point. So it seems a little weird in the way that it works, but I just want to make sure all of our members are clear as to how that is operationalized.
Can you say again, I'm sorry, how you're going to convey changes?
Yeah, so it depends on how significant and rapid the change is that needs to be made. If it is something significant and immediate that needs to occur, then, we're not able to call a board meeting before that has to go into place. So if that would occur, I'd confer with Nancy. I would say, work with her to say, we need to put this in place immediately based on the recommendation of DuPage County Health Department, legal, whatever that is, right? We would confer, then we would put that in place because it was some kind of a urgent issue that we had to respond to. The board would be informed that change would be made, and then we would communicate that out to the public, to students and families and staff. If it wasn't something that was urgent, then it would happen through the normal board process. Now, I might not be able to wait 2 or 3 weeks for the next board meeting for that to happen, so I may need to work with Nancy to call a special board meeting to talk about that change. So it could be any number of like just in the normal board work that, hey, here's a change we would like to make. We're seeing it's not really urgent, but we feel like we need to make this change, whether it be in practice or board policy as a result of the pandemic. One of those, I'll give you one that we're looking at right now, is our immunization policy and how that fits in right now with it's not anything related to COVID immunizations. It's the required state immunizations that have been there for like Tdap and all of those things, right? Yeah. So we have some language in there that might be difficult for families right now, just with COVID and everything else that's out there. And we're having internal discussions about what our board policy says about immunizations related to the state required immunizations and the timing and how that works. I might need to, before school starts, depending on what we find out related to those, come to the board or use this process over the next couple of weeks and say, we need to make a slight change in that. Because right now, the way that our language is written is that if you don't have the state mandated vaccinations in place by the first day of school, you cannot attend. Mm-hmm. Right now, we're trying to ascertain how many students haven't gotten those vaccinations. Do they intend to be able to get them before school starts? Is there something related to the return from COVID or increased cases or anything that's preventing them from being able to get vaccinated? If we find that that's the case, I might make a recommendation that we waive that policy and give them an extension to get those vaccines done before the school year starts. Or, or after the school year starts, so that they're not held out of class due to something that isn't a fault of theirs, right? If that's the case, we'll just play that forward and say that's the scenario. Our next board meeting is on the 16th. The 13th is the first day kids are back in school. If we find that that is a true issue, I will likely reach out to Nancy and say, hey, for the 13th and the 16th, we'd like to waive that part of the policy. I'm recommending we do it as administration. It's COVID related. We found that this is an issue related to COVID. For those first 2 days of school, I would like to suspend that policy and not hold students out of school. Nancy, I would confer with her. We'd discuss the pros and cons of it. I would let the board know Nancy and I are discussing it. We would make a decision at that point. Then on the 16th, which is our next board meeting, I would come to you and say, okay, we talked about this. I administratively waived that policy under the resolution you're about to pass tonight, hopefully. Now I need the board to give me direction of what we do moving forward. Do I continue to suspend that policy, or is it in place as written, which means starting the next day, the decision I made is null and void, and now it's what the board has decided, right? So that's kind of walking through a real scenario we're playing with right now as we try to determine the impact of COVID on our families and our students. That's exactly what this is set up to try to work around.
But to be clear, you're not talking about COVID immunizations.
There is no required COVID vaccination. No, not being discussed, not being considered by the administration or the board in any way. What I'm talking about is the traditional ones, which is why when I started talking about it, I'm like, oh, do I even want to dig into this? But it is the real thing that we're dealing with right now. Is the board policy says we must exclude students without their mandated vaccinations on the first day of school until they receive those vaccines. The state has a later deadline. We've got to figure out, is this a big issue or not? We're also talking about trying to run with CodoCare, who's been a partner for us on vaccine clinics for COVID, bringing them in to run clinics for families that were unable to. So we got a lot of irons in the fire right now that I'm not prepared yet to tell the board, hey, this is truly an issue, and here's our solution, and it's developing in real time. So I might need to make a decision before we're able to meet as a board to say this is what's best for our kids during these times. And then the next time we meet, we'll sort it out with the full board and make sure that the board feels comfortable with us continuing down that path or gives me a different direction. But that's how this is set up to work, just because things are developing and changing far more rapidly than they traditionally do around our practices at school. Things like this, like a pop-up vaccine clinic for mandated vaccines, not COVID, the other mandated vaccines, would be something we would spend months working on, but we're starting to get a feeling like this might be an issue as we return to school this year, and a lot of people that haven't seen their doctors in maybe 16 months because of COVID might be having challenges getting their children vaccinated right now with the required state mandated vaccines. So if we determine that that is truly a problem, we're going to try to respond to that and help our families and our kids out so that they're not held out of school. But we got to work through it all and figure it out. So that's a real-time example of something that administratively we're wrestling with and trying to get our heads around how to respond to that, and might have to make a change in real time to offer resources to our students and families. So that's a very long answer to a very direct question. Any other questions?
Sorry. Can I ask about people that are going to be having to quarantine more than once?
Yeah, it's possible. We had it last spring. It is possible that somebody would have to quarantine more than once.
And so then you're looking at someone who's possibly missing 16 days of school?
The question is it possible that somebody would have to quarantine more than once? Yes, it is possible. And yes, then we would have to respond and meet that student's learning needs for the entire duration that they're out for.
Sorry. The plan we're voting on then, every Friday, you're going to make a determination based on the numbers
Yeah, I
as
mean,
to where we're at.
Yeah, it's not really a determination, right?
Well, I mean, it's...
Yeah, are we above the line or below the line? Yeah. If we're below the line for the next week, we would go back to the mask optional.
Well, you raise a good question because, oh, sorry, thank you. You raise a good question because last year, before you guys came on board, one of the things that was difficult was that we were trying to match the mitigation for, depending on the numbers. And it got to, do you round up, do you run down, and it would seem to me that, and I think, what did we had it that you had to have 3 consistent weeks.
It was all over the place because the guidance kept changing.
The guidance kept, but you have to have a trend for over 3 weeks. So I would hope that we would never get to the point where we'd say, this week we're at 49.9, so no masks, and next week we're at 50.1, so we mask. I mean, we would want to see a trend of at least 3 data points of a downward or upward trend.
The CDC guidance has you reevaluating every 7 days. It's a 7-day rolling. The fact that it's a 7-day rolling average has a trend built into it by using that number. And our experience from last year was not seeing a jagged line, right? We didn't see that even in the variety of data we were looking at last year. You saw steady increases and then steady decreases and steady increase. Right now we're in one of those waves up right now. I fully expect, based on what we saw last year, at some point we'll hit the peak of this new wave and it'll turn around and go back the other way until some other factor, variable, plays into it, and then it'll turn around. Now, it might go up and stay there for a little bit, but then something will cause it to go back down, whether it's expansion of vaccines to pediatric patients, whether it's enough people have gotten the Delta variant that now there's, just less people getting it, so it starts dropping. We have not seen a lot of zigzag patterns over the last year and a half. We've seen these steady increases and then falls and then rise and then fall. I would imagine we would see the same thing here. Yeah, it is possible that come Friday, a number sits right on one side of the line or the other, but we talked through this multiple times last year. At some point, there's a line, and the CDC has recommended as to where that line should fall. I'm recommending that that's, for now, what we use, and then we monitor it and see what makes sense from there. I'm hoping this is a quick turnaround, as I said earlier, and by the time kids come back next week, or the week after, but by the end of this week, we're looking at the next week's numbers, that we see a rapid fall here over the next few days, and then we're back closer to normal. If not, for everybody's sake, health-wise, that it continues to fall, and we get back to normal as quick as possible.
So the data point you're using is the 7-day rolling average, 50 or less.
50 or less would put us in the mask optional, above 50. Or what? No, actually, it's 49.9 or less would be mask optional. 50 or higher would be the higher substantial transmission rates and would be universal masking.
Well, my point is, if you look at the daily, to your point, you're looking at the 7-day average. We're not looking at the daily number. We're looking at the 7-day average number on Friday. Thank you.
Yeah, the 7-day average number has a trend built into it.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions? All right. As I've mentioned multiple times, this is up for action later this evening. under the resolution. We have moved the first reception of visitors to this point so that the audience had an opportunity to hear the administration's recommendation and provide any feedback.
So we will begin the first reception of visitors.
I have two.
Okay.
The way that this will work is this first reception of visitors is for action items. I'll call you up in the order in which the slips were received. We have two of them. Once I call you up and you get there, I'll advance to a screen that has a timer on it. Once you start talking, I'll start the timer. Once it hits the end of the time, we ask that you step away from the microphone and conclude your comments. So the first person is Kevin Custer.
Good evening. First, Hank, I'd like to say you haven't referenced, and if you have, I apologize, you haven't referenced what specific site you're getting the positivity rate from. Can you please inform the public of that so we can monitor it as well? According to the DuPage County Health.org, which I just looked at, the 5 county zip code for 7-day average positivity rate for 100,000 is 74. That is below the number of 78 where we need to wear masks. We are not in compliance for your own rules.
I'm going to pause you and I'm going to give you back 2 minutes and 30 seconds so I can fix it. Just
sure.
So the data comes from the CDC that points to county by county data. And the threshold cutoff you referenced as 74 is below our number. The number from the CDC as presented just a second ago, the cutoff is at 50. So under 50 would be masks optional. 50 or over would be masks required.
Thank you for that
Okay.
clarification.
Because 50 puts you at substantial.
50 puts you at substantial. So I just want to,
I'm sorry, 50 puts you at substantial?
50 puts you at substantial, and then above that puts you at high.
Severe or something like that.
It's high. Let me pull it up for you. So 50 to 99 is substantial. 100 or higher is high. So those two ranges would be universal masking required, and then below that would be moderate or low.
Okay.
Okay? Just to make sure we're all clear.
Absolutely.
I'm going to start the clock, and I'll resume your 3 minutes.
Thank you.
Since I cut into your time.
The other thing I want to say is this: perception becomes reality. It's what is perceived. And as a parent here of District 99, the perception is that information is not getting to us in a timely manner. I'll take, for example, the board meeting last week, right? There were so many people that kept saying, I can't hear. Rather than adjusting the audio or people speaking with their voices, they kept saying that. That just increases people's anxiety and their frustration. And that then comes upon you guys, right? And I know you don't want any more frustration, so I commend you for making adjustments and changes to the audio here today. If you're back at South, I'd recommend you do that again. Hank, you said that the board member, in terms of this mask mandate, that you received it a while back. I don't remember your exact words, but you received it prior to today.
No, noon today was for Illinois.
Noon today you received it?
Yes.
Okay. What I'd say to you is this: the more information people have, the better they will be and the better they'll feel about things. In terms of the voting on consistency, mask or not mask, here's what I'd say to you. Michael, Joanne, I noticed you were cold. I got cold too. You put a sweater on. You made an adjustment based upon your environment. Okay? I didn't wear a parka today because I don't need one. So if we're going to have these mask mandates at certain thresholds, these kids are smart enough and they can make changes. They'll make adjustments in their clothing when it's cold, when it's hot. They can do it with masks. And that shows us that we're moving towards getting back to a sense of normalcy, right? Inconsistency is life. Having just this blanket thing saying we're always going to do it without thresholds is not what the educational system is about, right? You set up, this is what you need to get an A, this is what you need to get a B, and you hold it hard and you hold it fast. What I'm asking the board to do is to do a better job in communicating, giving information as quickly as possible. Hank, I get it. You got it today, right? But just let people know that. So you've got all these people that hear about the board meeting going on today, and the perception is that you're withholding. Whether it's right or wrong, that's the perception. And that's what you guys get painted with. When people can't hear things, they believe that you're withholding, and they believe that it's adversarial. Last thing I'm going to say, today's death total was 362. 320 people die every day of Alzheimer's. 1,800 people die every day of heart disease. At the height of the pandemic, there was 3,000 to 4,000 people dying a day. We have lowered that rate by 10-fold.
I'm sorry, your time has expired. Thank you. All right, and then, oh boy, I've been out of the classroom a while, so reading handwriting is not as good as it used to be. I believe this is Dan submitted a slip? Yes, please approach the microphone. What's that? Oh, would Leanne? No, that's it. This is the second slip. That's it. Yeah, could you please state your name?
Dan. Good evening. I just, I guess want to make a comment or two. I know, Hank, you and I have had several conversations already, and I think this is a lot that we're all going through, and there's a lot of information and disinformation out there, and I guess, as far as I know, I don't believe the FDA approved the shot yet to call it a vaccine. Is that true?
It is approved under emergency use authorization.
Okay, but not officially approved, so that's just my big
No,
concern.
it's officially approved. It's under emergency, so it's been tested and it has been approved.
Okay.
It's
By the FDA.
by the FDA.
Okay, not official, but emergency use only.
Correct.
Right, so I think there's a big difference there, I guess, is my opinion, but that's a big concern I have. We've had conversations about that before, and, parents are watching closely. These are our kids, and we should have choice in what they do or do not do as well.
Thank you. All right. That's it for the slips we've received.
Okay.
So we'll have another reception of visitors once we're done with the remainder of the evening.
So we're going to move in then to Title IX training.
Yes. Gina?
Okay, as the board may recall, we underwent Title IX training last year, and we have Kendra from Franzik joining us this evening for an update. It's recommended that annually we review Title IX and that the board be trained in Title IX regulations. So with that, I will turn it over to Kendra.
Thank you, Gina. Can you guys hear me? Yeah? Okay. Well, thank you for having me out this evening. It's nice to see people in person again. I'm used to doing these over Zoom. I'm an attorney at Franzik, and happy to be here to talk about Title IX. There we go. Okay, so I know a lot of you did do a training with Jackie last year on the 2020 rules about sexual harassment. And so for those of you, this will be a little bit of a review. I also have some updates for you. For those of you who are new, this is a good foundation and overview of what Title IX requires, and specifically the new regulations that went into effect last August. So first of all, there had been some talk, what's going to happen now that we have a new administration. The rules that went into effect last year are here to stay, certainly for this school year, most likely for several school years to come still. President Biden, when he was campaigning, did indicate he intends to make significant changes to these rules, but that is easier said than done. It is a lengthy process. Some of you may remember that back in 2016, when President Trump was campaigning, he also said he was going to make these new rules. That took quite some time. It took until November of 2018 to come out with a proposed rule. It took another 18 months to go through 125,000 comments that people had. People are very invested in this issue and had a lot of feedback. The final rule came out in May of 2020 and went into effect in August. So if the Biden administration moves at that same pace, we won't see a new final rule go into effect until 2024, right? So this is a long, long process. The administration may be able to speed that up. They are pursuing a slightly different approach. They had some listening sessions and hearings in June to gather public comment before proposing a new rule, so they can gather some feedback and hopefully then shorten that process a little bit. But this is going to be a long process, and in the meantime, the 2020 rules do remain in effect. So just in July, the Office of Civil Rights issued a question and answer. It largely reiterates the information that was in the preamble to the 2020 amendments. So some people had thought that the new administration would try to sort of maybe massage or, change a little bit how we interpret what's in the rules, and parts of it that they don't like as much. But they went at it a very straightforward way. The answers to the questions really parrot back exactly what is in the regulations and what is in the preamble. And there's not that much room for different interpretations anyway. It is interesting in that it highlights the things that OCR thinks are important. What are the things that those of us in schools need to know? That's what's in the question and answers. And so I'll highlight some of that as we go through the presentation today. One thing to note is that you remember from the presentation last year that the definition of sexual harassment under Title IX now is narrower than it used to be. It covers less conduct. It is a stricter definition, a higher threshold. OCR wants to make sure that we know that conduct that is sexual harassment that doesn't meet that threshold doesn't mean you ignore it. It wants to reiterate for you that still, if it violates your student code of conduct, you are going to investigate and impose discipline if it is found that it occurred. If it's employee matter, you're still going to follow all of your standard procedures, even if it doesn't fall under Title IX. Okay, OCR has been busy over the spring and summer, so another Q&A that they put out was specifically about civil rights during remote learning and school reopening. And there's nothing really surprising here, but it's really reiterating and emphasizing the Biden administration's focus on civil rights and saying that all the civil rights laws, they continue to apply regardless of whether you are in remote or hybrid or coming back into school buildings. So it addresses racial discrimination, discrimination based on disability, and Title IX sexual discrimination. And there are several questions specific to Title IX about if you receive a report about harassment that occurred during remote learning, do you have to address that? Yes, absolutely. If you receive a report and you're currently doing remote, and so you're not in the building and easily able to handle things, do you still need to address it? Yes, absolutely. Some things might look a little different. You might have interviews that take place over Zoom or other technology, but we're still going to comply with all the same rules regardless of the format that school is operating in. One thing I was hoping we would get that we don't have yet is some data on how many of these complaints we got last year. There was anticipation that we would receive fewer complaints, that schools would get fewer complaints, that OCR would get fewer complaints, because the standard is higher and because the process is harder. We don't have that data yet. When we do get it, it's going to be a little bit muddled because we also have the effect of COVID, and we have the effect of a lot of schools being remote, so there was less opportunity for students to be in the same place where harassment might occur. Additionally, even if there was harassment, I think we had a situation where some students didn't feel as compelled to come forward and say, hey, school, this bad thing happened, I need help, if they knew they could just be on remote and they wouldn't see the other person. And so it's possible now that kids are coming back, you might start to hear that last year, when we were on remote learning, this thing happened, and now I'm concerned about it because we're all coming back into the building. So we may see sort of an uptick in reports that you guys are receiving as we get students back into the building. Another report that the Department of Education put out has to do with the disparate impacts of COVID-19 on different groups of more vulnerable students. And one of the groups that is addressed is LGBTQ students. So these students, prior to the pandemic, had higher rates of bullying, harassment, victimization, mental health issues, suicide attempts, all kinds of difficult things. They were more likely to be runaways, more likely to be homeless, which also compounds the challenges that they face. The data coming in is preliminary on the impact of COVID-19 on this group of students, but preliminarily, there are concerns that they are more heavily impacted because they relied heavily on the mental health services that schools provide. And that was harder to access just because people aren't as comfortable doing that kind of thing over Zoom. You have to schedule it. You can't just pop into somebody's office as easily. You don't have that daily communication. So early survey results indicate that LGBTQ students had a harder time with their schoolwork, had a harder time communicating and connecting with peers, and had just a higher impact mental health-wise. So that's another thing that we're going to be on the lookout for as students are coming back to make sure that we're supportive of all students, and especially students who may have been more impacted by the pandemic. Okay, more from the Department of Education. If they keep on this track, we're just going to be here all night. So this is specifically about LGBTQ students in Title IX, and this is a notice that the Department of Ed put out saying that Title IX protects students from discrimination and harassment on the basis of gender identity and sexual orientation. This is based on a Supreme Court decision called Bostock versus Clayton County that was decided last year. It was in the employment context, so under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act as opposed to Title IX of the Educational Amendments. And the Department of Education says there's no reason that we should come to a different conclusion. Both statutes prohibit discrimination on the basis of sex, and the court found that you can't discriminate based on sexual orientation or gender identity without discriminating on the basis of sex. It's just definitionally part of discrimination on the basis of sex. And the Department of Education says same exact reasoning applies to Title IX. What's interesting is they do not specifically call out the issues that have been hot button issues over the past few years, like bathrooms, locker rooms, and sports. What they do say is very broadly that no student should be deprived equal access to the educational program of a school because of their sex, including sexual orientation and gender identity. Biden has nominated Catherine Lehman to run OCR. She was also in charge under Obama and was very aggressive in promoting the rights of LGBTQ students and ensuring that schools followed the law in the way that the Obama administration interpreted the law. So we expect to see a similar approach from the Biden administration. Additionally, here in Illinois, we kind of already have that because the Seventh Circuit has decided that students should be granted access to restrooms and locker rooms on the basis of their gender identity, and the Illinois Human Rights Act also requires that. So not a big change for us here, but a shift at the national level. Okay, so getting into the regulations and responding to sexual harassment. You guys are aware the impact of sexual harassment can have significant, long-lasting negative effects on victims, certainly on their mental health, on their school performance. Additionally, and this is kind of what is attempted to be addressed by the regulations, unfair processes can also have detrimental effects on both parties. If the process, when you report harassment, is unfair to either party, that's going to be a problem that's going to impact them broadly as well as specifically in school. We also want to make sure we are addressing this because there's legal risk involved. The law requires that we respond to reports of sexual harassment, And failure to do so can lead to legal challenges both within OCR as well as at court. And that can come from the complainant, the person who is saying they experienced sexual harassment, if they believe that the school district did not appropriately address it. It can also come from the respondent, from the accused, if they feel like they did not get due process. Okay, so starting big picture, Title IX. The first thing most of us think about is sports, especially right now during the Olympics. That's what I'm thinking about. Title IX, however, this is the language of the statute. It's quite brief, but it's very broad. No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any educational program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. So you notice it does not reference sports. It doesn't reference sexual harassment, right? It's really, really just no sex discrimination. You can't treat people differently based on sex. So that has been interpreted to apply to a whole range of different things, including athletics, like we talked about, sexual harassment, like we're going to talk about today, but also with discipline. You know, if a boy claims that he is being more harshly disciplined for the same offense than a girl was. It also has to do with how you treat pregnant and parenting students. It encompasses a large variety of things. We're going to talk about sex-based harassment because that is what the regulations govern, but all of these things are still falling under Title IX. So if you receive a report of a problem in any of these areas, it still needs to land on Gina's desk to be addressed. It just won't be addressed using this process. Okay, so our Title IX regulations prohibit discrimination on the basis of sex. And really the big change is there are a bunch of procedural requirements. It used to be that OCR was just looking to see, did you follow your policy if you got a report of sexual harassment or sexual misconduct at school? Did you do it the way you said, and was it fair? Now they've set out this very detailed process that we need to follow, and we've got to step through all the hoops. So this requires that you have the policy, a procedure, you have your Title IX coordinator, and a whole bunch of really nitty-gritty details that we'll talk a little bit about, but that your administration has been trained on in a lot of detail. Okay, so when is the school district required to respond to sexual harassment? I've broken this up because there are a lot of components. A school with actual knowledge of Title IX sexual harassment in an educational program or activity against a person in the United States, then you must respond promptly and in a manner that is not deliberately indifferent. So there are a lot of pieces there, and we're going to talk a little bit about each of them just so you get a better sense of what really falls under Title IX. So actual knowledge. This can be something that you actually personally witness, something that is reported to you verbally or in writing, something that you just hear about. The Q&A that was just issued mentioned if you read about it in the newspaper, if there's an anonymous report, if you get this information, if your employees get this information pretty much from anywhere that there's sexual harassment occurring, then the school district has knowledge. You sense it, you hear a report, or you hear about it. Okay, if someone wants to make an actual report, anybody can report it. It does not have to be the alleged victim. It can be somebody else. You can make it by mail, telephone, email, and it can be made at any time. So you guys have systems in place so that somebody doesn't have to come find Gina in her office during business school hours. You can make that report anytime, any day, and you can make it anonymously if you want to. So you are required to respond if an official with authority has knowledge. An official with authority means an authority to take some sort of action to remedy the problem. And at the higher education level, that's limited to certain particular employees. At the K-12 level, that is all employees. All employees, no matter what their role is. If they hear about sexual harassment, the district has an obligation to respond. As board members, you guys are not specifically included as an employee. You are, however, mandated reporters if you hear about sexual harassment or abuse that would fall under ANCRA, under abused and neglected children. So just a distinction to keep in mind. Okay, so let's narrow in on what exactly is sexual harassment. Falls into 3 buckets. One is hostile environment, one is quid pro quo by an employee, and the other are these sort of big 4: sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking. So let's start with quid pro quo, something for something. Specifically, we're talking about an employee of the school conditioning an aid, service, or benefit on an individual's participation in unwelcome sexual conduct. So it's important to note that this is initiated by an employee as opposed to a volunteer or a student. If the head of the school newspaper tells somebody else on staff, I'll publish this article if you engage in this activity, that doesn't fall under quid pro quo. We'd have to look at it under hostile environment. But if any employee towards any student says, if you engage in this sexual act, then I will give you a better grade, get you onto this team, any benefit of the school system, then it's going to fall under quid pro quo. The big 4, that's the ones that I mentioned here: sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking. You have the citations there because sort of unhelpfully, they send you on this sort of goose chase to find the definitions of those. They are now helpfully in the Q&A, exactly what each of those means. And so that is helpful to have those definitions. Any of these, between students, between staff and students, that's going to fall under Title IX sexual harassment. Okay, hostile environment is the one that comes up probably more frequently, is more typical harassment. And I've broken up this definition into lines also because it has a lot of components. So it starts with unwelcome conduct that is determined by a reasonable person to be so severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive that it effectively denies a person equal access to the recipient, school, education's program, or activity. So you need to have a lot of pieces there. It starts with unwelcome conduct, which is subjective to the alleged victim. Then it switches to an objective standard, a reasonable person standard, reasonable person in the shoes of the alleged victim. So a person of that age, of that gender, in the relationship to the other people. That is both severe and pervasive and objectively offensive. That it denies equal access to the school. So we've got to have all of these different components. Again, if we don't have one of these, that doesn't mean it's okay. That does not mean is it accepted in the school environment. It means we're going to address it under our code of conduct and not through these procedures. One of the last phrase there was that it effectively denies equal access to the program. The Q&A says that this really shouldn't block anybody out. This should be looked at very expansively. It could be a student who is having trouble getting to class because they're trying to avoid their harasser. It could be a student who's upset by what's going on and their grades are dropping. It could not really be showing up at school. They give an example of a 3rd grader who's crying at night and wetting the bed. There could be a lot of different impacts, and the OCR has encouraged schools not to look for necessarily a concrete injury, but to say if we have met all of those other criteria, we're going to assume that that student is not going to be able to have equal access to their education. The next part of the definition is that the sexual harassment has to take place in a program or activity of the school district. What that means is any location, event, or circumstance over which the recipient exhibits substantial control over both the alleged harasser and the context where the harassment occurred. So clearly, if the kids are sitting in math class harassing each other, you are in school, you have authority over the context, you have authority over both students, that would fall within your program or activity. Things that happen off campus, things that happen online, those we're going to have to look at a lot more carefully to think about, is that something that the school has control over? We did get, from many districts, reports where people were coming to school saying, this thing happened off campus at this party over the weekend, and I want you to do something about it. I want you to look into it. I want you to do something. That's not going to be within Title IX, most likely, because you don't have any authority over the party that happens over the weekend. These things, that doesn't mean you say, sorry, we can't help you at all, right? You can still support that student, but it's probably not going to fall under your Title IX process. Again, online is going to get really difficult. Online, if it's during remote learning on your remote platform, yep, that's going to fall within your program or activity. On Snapchat over the summer, probably not. But there are probably a lot of gray area in between those two examples where we're going to have to dig in and look at those facts. Additionally, we have to address sexual harassment if it occurs against a person in the United States. The time when this might not be the case, if you have a trip abroad, your band, your choir, some group that goes abroad, hopefully one day in the future we will be able to do that again. But if something happens abroad, that's not going to fall under Title IX. Again, absolutely you're going to address it. You would not use this process. Okay, so how do we respond? What is required now? There are 3 possible responses depending on the type of conduct. So if it is Title IX sexual harassment that we just talked about, you have your policy 265, and that is the new one that is specific to these regulations. For other sexual harassment, other forms of discrimination based on sex, that will often fall under 2260, which is your uniform grievance procedure. For other misconduct between students, most likely that's going to fall under your student code of conduct. So you can kind of think of it as a road that splits. If it's Title IX, you're going to go down your procedure under 2265. For everything else, where you get a report that even if true, it doesn't meet that threshold, then you're going to use a different process to address it. Now, if you go down your Title IX route and you find that the respondent is not responsible, you cannot turn around and then use a different method to try to impose discipline. You're just done. If we can't use the Title IX because it doesn't fall under all those criteria, then you are going to look to see whether another policy will apply. Okay, so here's the response. First step, when you have information that looks like it could be Title IX sexual harassment, is the Title IX coordinator or designee is going to meet with the complainant to offer supportive measures. Then, if there is a formal complaint, we go through these steps of informal resolution if both parties agree, investigation, decision, and a possibility for appeal. So we'll talk a little bit about each of these. So the first step is that informal meeting with the complainant. This is not an investigative interview. This is a time for the Title IX coordinator or designee to say, we can offer you supportive measures, we can offer you help, regardless of whether or not you file a formal complaint. Additionally, if you do file a formal complaint, this is what the process is going to look like. So that they know kind of what this is going to look like, what they're going to go through, and what their options are. In the high school setting, for students who are under 18, this will involve parents. Parents are going to be involved throughout this process anytime we are dealing with minors. Confidentiality. If no formal complaint is filed, we will maintain confidentiality of the complainant. If the complainant does file a formal complaint, their identity has to be disclosed to the respondent. The rules in this area are very specific, that in order for the respondent to be able to defend themselves, they need to know who the complainant is. So you're still going to maintain confidentiality among other people, right? That doesn't mean that just anybody in the school should know. But the identity will be disclosed to the respondent so they are able to respond and defend themselves. Supportive measures, I mentioned, these are individualized services offered as appropriate without charge. They can be offered to the complainant, or if a complaint is actually filed, to the respondent as well. before or after the filing of a complaint, or if no complaint has been filed, they can still be offered. And the point is to try to restore or preserve equal access to the educational program without unreasonably burdening the other party. So oftentimes we're talking about counseling or social work support for one or both students. It could be additional supervision. It could be changing the class schedule. It could be a mutual no contact agreement. There are lots of different things that may be beneficial depending on the specific situation. There's also an opportunity, generally, we cannot take the respondent out of their class or out of their activity because they haven't been found responsible yet, right? We're not prejudging this, so we're not going to do anything that would be punitive at this early stage. The exception for students is if it is necessary to protect a student or other individual from immediate threat to their physical health or safety. In that case, the Title IX regulations allow for that student to be removed. You guys should have alarm bells going off saying, well, wait a minute, what about SB 100? And we have rules about suspension and expulsion and protections for students with disabilities. And you're exactly right, and it is difficult to mesh these, and we need to follow both processes. So we will be in close communication if we get to that point, which hopefully you will not. It is different with respect to employees. So if an employee is accused of engaging in sexual harassment or misconduct, you can put that person on administrative leave in line with your CBA and with state law. Okay, so it does not put any restrictions on your ability to do that. So briefly here, just student removals. We do have our discipline laws. Administrators only can suspend for up to 10 days. The board, you guys would need to approve any sort of expulsion, any removal for greater than 10 days. And of course, the IDEA and Section 504 have additional protections. So we want to keep all those things in mind before removing a student. Okay, so if a formal complaint is filed, let's talk about that formal complaint. The formal complaint is a document that is signed by the complainant or by the Title IX coordinator, alleging sexual harassment against a respondent and requesting that the school investigate the allegation of sexual harassment. It cannot be filed by a third party. So a third party can report it, but they cannot file the formal complaint. So the complainant can file it if they are attempting to participate in your program, or if they are not willing to, I think I have another slide on this, yes, to file a formal complaint, they don't want to pursue this. If it is something that is significant, if the respondent is a staff member, somebody with authority within the school system, if it is repeated, if there are other reasons to be concerned that if we do not go through this process, we could expose other people to risk, then your Title IX coordinator can sign a complaint. The alleged victim is still the complainant, even though they have not filed a complaint. It's sort of confusing language. But in that case, the Title IX coordinator signs. This is a really weighty decision because, like I said a few slides ago, it means that complainant can't be confidential anymore. Their identity is going to be disclosed to the respondent that they came to the school and said, this is what happened, and I want you to take action. So that is a new thing with these regulations. The next step is informal resolution. This cannot be required. It has to be voluntary. Both parties have to agree in writing that they're going to participate. And you can't say, you know, if you participate in this, then you get this benefit, or if you don't, it has to be completely voluntary. It is not available if the respondent is an employee and the complainant is a student. It is not allowed then. Only allowed if it's between student and student or between employee and employee. It cannot be used unless a formal complaint has been filed. It can be used at any time during the investigation process. So at any point, if we're going through this process and both parties say, hey, this is kind of onerous, I don't know where this is going to go, I think we can work this out in an easier way, you can stop what you're doing and do informal resolution. However, if you're doing informal resolution and one or both parties says, this is not working for me, I don't think this is going to get me to where I want to go, then it stops and you go back to the investigation. Okay, the investigation. This is a really detailed process in the regulations that obviously we're not going to go through all of the requirements. Your administrators have been trained on this. And this is really a shift from what was required before 2020. So who's going to be investigating? We do not recommend having your Title IX coordinator do the investigation because she's going to be sort of a resource. She's going to be monitoring everything. We want somebody else to take that role. They do need to be trained. They need to be unbiased, meaning they don't have any actual or perceived conflict of interest. And this is really an interesting thing here. We have a presumption that the respondent is not responsible, right? Kind of like in criminal court, we assume that the defendant is not guilty. However, that does not mean you presume the complainant is lying, right? We believe the complainant. And so you have to hold both of those things in your head. You believe the complainant and you believe that the respondent is not responsible. Because we are not going to prejudge before we have any evidence. So at the outset, everybody is credible. There's a lot here. Like I said, the investigation is very detailed in the requirements. Top one is another important one. The burden of proof is on the school. It's not the burden of the complainant to prove that this happened, and it's not the burden of the respondent to prove that they're not responsible. The school has the burden to prove what did happen. Additionally, both parties always get notice before there's an interview of when and who's going to be there and what the topic is. Parties can have an advisor or an attorney with them during an interview. After the investigator has collected all of their evidence, all of the evidence goes to both parties. They both have an opportunity to review all of the evidence and submit any feedback to the investigator. The investigator then writes a report that summarizes all of the evidence, and that is also provided to both of the parties. So you can see this can be a fairly lengthy process because there's timelines built into it. Getting to the decision next. The decision maker, again, not the Title IX coordinator, not the investigator, so it needs to be somebody new. You are not required to do a live hearing. In higher education, they are. In K-12, we do not recommend it. A written determination is required. But before you get there, because we're not doing a live hearing, and the respondent should have an opportunity to confront their accuser and the witnesses, we have written cross-examination. So each party, or their parent, or their attorney, has the opportunity to have questions. They submit it to the decision maker. The decision maker submits it to the other party. They answer, send it back to the decision maker, who sends the answer back to the party who asked the question, and they can ask follow-up questions. So again, this can take some time. The decision maker gets to decide what's relevant. We follow the rape shield laws, which means questions about the complainant's sexual history or predisposition are off limits. We cannot access treatment records, physical or mental treatment records, unless there's consent to do so. Also, legally privileged information remains legally privileged. So they can't ask questions about what did you talk to your attorney about, what did you talk to your clergy member about, all of that would be out of bounds. And the decision maker uses the preponderance of evidence standard of proof. That's 50% and a feather. So if it's more likely than not that it happened, the respondent is responsible. If it's not more likely than not, then they would not be. Remedies. If the respondent is responsible, then there can be discipline taken. Additionally, we can offer more supportive measures, counseling for the victim or for the accused. There might be changes to services, changes to your policies. Whether or not the respondent is responsible, it might result in the district saying, we need to beef up our education, our sex education on consent, on dating safety, on internet safety. We need to make sure that students have a good understanding of what this means and how to protect themselves. Okay, appeal. You also need an appellate decision maker. So this is another person. This is why Gina has so many of your administrators trained, because different people have to do each step of the process. So again, this cannot be the Title IX coordinator, can't be the investigator, and it can't be the initial decision maker. Both parties have an opportunity to appeal. Both parties have an opportunity to submit a written statement, and the decision then will be issued to both parties. You cannot appeal just on anything you want. There are 3 specific reasons. The first one is a procedural issue that impacted the outcome. The second is if there is new evidence that was not reasonably available during the decision phase that would impact the outcome. And the third is if there was a bias or conflict of interest on the part of anybody in the process, whether that was the investigator, the decision maker, the Title IX coordinator. If there was any sort of bias, that can be a basis for appeal as well. This bias, conflicts of interest, and fairness is a big focus of the new regulations. All of the people involved, the coordinator, investigator, decision makers, informal resolution facilitators, cannot have a conflict of interest or bias for or against complainants or respondents generally, or for and against any individual person involved in the matter, and cannot prejudge any matter before them. So we want to make sure that we don't have decision makers and investigators who are outspoken kind of on either side of this issue, kind of in the more global sense. Everybody needs to come to this issue, this particular case, with an open mind, ready to gather the evidence and go where the facts lead them. There's also a lot of record keeping involved in this. At each stage, there are records created that need to be maintained. Those are student records, so they're going to be confidential, but would be available to the student's parents. All right. I went through a lot of information. Hopefully that breaks a spell to somebody's face. Does anybody have questions at this point?
I just had one. First of all, thank you.
Sure.
It was actually very clear.
Okay.
For us, I know Gina, if you don't know, is our Title IX coordinator. Who's involved in the decision-making in the appeal?
So we have, I'm sorry, thank you. We have trained numerous people for each role to ensure that we're always covered. So for example, decision maker could be the principals. But we have other people trained as well, because it doesn't have to be the principals. Even for me as Title IX coordinator, it could be a designee. So for example, Scott Ugazer has been trained as a Title IX coordinator, so he can step in. So we trained a lot of administrators, and we'll be doing some retraining, in fact, so that we have it covered. And so we've also done it so we have both genders, by the way, so that it's not just a
so it's
single
an
gender
administrator
sense.
level is trained, and we have multiple. Okay, thank you, Gina.
Pretty much everybody on the administrative team has a role that they could play, or multiple roles that they could play in the process. And Gina has spent so much time making sure that District 99 is prepared to respond to these changes and do it appropriately and respectfully of everybody involved. She needs to be commended for the amount of work that she put into this over the last, I don't know, year and a half. And with very short notice last summer, while we were in the middle of trying to figure out what to do in response to a pandemic, Gina was also sorting out how to respond to this appropriately. So I just want to make sure that that doesn't go unnoticed. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kendra. Appreciate it.
All right, a couple of quick items. Location of future board meetings. As noted, we moved into here this week. We had to keep our location before because of construction. The South High Commons was our only large space available last board meeting. We did complete the new tile right outside here in front of the main entrance, so you can see that on your way out. And that opened up this location for this board meeting. And then the next board meeting, we're going to hold it at the brand new South Auditorium. So we have a chance to show off that new space. So that'll be August 16th. We'll be there. After that, kids are back. So all of our spaces start getting filled up by student programming and musicals and plays and athletics and all of those kinds of things. So our big spaces are going to be limited moving forward because we're back to normal instruction, right? And normal activities and those kinds of things. So starting in September, we'll move back to our old home, back at the Administrative Service Center. We will accommodate, right now there's currently no restrictions on number of people, so we'll have chairs set up just like we used to. And if large groups wish to present, we'll encourage them to send a representative to speak on the group's behalf. If we have anticipation of a large controversial issue, like a major change in the return to school plan, as we have done in the past, we'll try to locate to another large area, like we've done at the cafeteria at South before, or, you know, maybe it's one of the common spaces, or we'll try to move into a large space, but we try to stick to a consistent space because of the audio and video and those kinds of things to make sure that people have a good experience if they're attending our meeting in person or if they're watching online. As a result of COVID, one of the things we did do was start live streaming our board meetings. So even though we might be back in a smaller space, everybody in the world can participate in real time and watch our meetings take place. As a reminder, school board meetings are meetings in public, not with the public. So the fact that they are streaming allows our entire public to observe our work as we do it as a board and administration. So that's the plan moving forward. So board members over at South to check out that brand new space on the 16th. And then from there back to our good old home.
We'll have breadcrumbs to get to the auditorium.
The auditorium's still where the auditorium always was.
Yeah,
It's
but
just
will we be
big.
coming in the front door then?
Yeah, we're going to come in
Okay.
through the main entrance and
Okay.
walk through the brand new commons on our
Cool.
way and past the new cafe on the way to the new auditorium. On the next thing, since we're on it, master facility plan, just a few images that were released today. These are hot off the presses. The board hasn't even seen these yet. Some of the pictures of the auditorium and common space that are being put into place. You can see the top left-hand corner is the auditorium. Top right-hand corner is the new west events entrance with the fly tower of the auditorium in the background. That's another one of those images that looks really close to a rendering that the board has seen in the past. You can see the main stage entrance that you'll be entering in for the next board meeting in the bottom left-hand corner. And then you can see some parking lot getting finished up as we clean up that west events entrance over at South. Way in the background, you can see the brand new bleachers. South Commons is coming along. Top left-hand corner is the grand staircase. Still a lot of activity going on the floor around it. You can see that. Then the next picture, that is the new meeting room, the community room at South. In that top right-hand corner. Bottom left-hand corner is an aerial view of the outdoor eating area outside of the commons. That's what's left of the old courtyard, which is still a lot of outdoor space for our kids. And then bottom left-hand corner is some more of that commons cafeteria space coming into shape. So a lot going on over at South. Over at North, if you have an opportunity, board members or anybody in the audience that would like to, you could just walk out the door here at the end of the night, and you could walk into the commons here at North, and it is gorgeous. And North didn't have as much going on this summer, so they're a little further along than South is. That's far left is the commons. Middle is the outdoor events entrance, where we are replacing the glass curtain wall that is there. That's an update as part of the capital project, I believe. And then the far right-hand side is the outdoor eating patio at North that's coming into place. And you can see it's very similar to the commons. If you walk through the commons, you'll be able to see that tonight as well. So a lot underway. You can see it really taking shape here and coming to fruition. All right, so master facility plan remains on time and on budget.
Nicely done.
I've reported that for the last 5 years, and I'm very proud of that. All right, we have one recommendation for action this evening.
Okay, so we need a motion for the Board of Education to approve the 2021-2022 return to in-person instruction plan approval resolution.
So moved.
Second.
Mike, and I didn't hear the second.
Second.
Terry.
Thank you very much. Mike Davenport,
Aye.
Terry Pavasich,
Aye.
Christopher Espinoza,
Aye.
Sherelle Fuller. Aye. Jenny Hagstrom,
Aye.
Joanna Vasquez Drexler,
Aye.
Nancy Kupka.
Aye, the motion carries. Next, we'll move into the second reception of visitors. Is there anybody who wishes to address the board?
We have no additional comment slips, but
Okay.
I do have a short prepared statement that I would like to read.
Go ahead.
I would like to take a moment to provide some perspective on the public comments at the last board meeting related to our work on diversity and inclusion. When we hear the term critical race theory, CRT, we, here as the administration, believe that this is referring to the branch of graduate level research within critical legal studies. CRT is a graduate level tool for investigating the role of race and racism in the legal aspects of society or in other areas of scholarship. This is not a concept that has been used in our work around equity and inclusion, and anyone who says the two are connected in District 99 are wrong. Regarding our actual work, District 99 is dedicated to continuing to teach students to recognize and overcome challenges. Students may create these challenges for themselves. Sometimes, like COVID, they arrive out of everyone's control, while others are built into systems and are almost invisible to all but those who are impacted by them. And sometimes there's obstacles that are intentionally put in students' ways. Each student also comes to us with unique abilities and benefits that should be grown and developed to their full potential. We are in a community with enough resources where caring for and challenging each individual student does not come at a negative cost to other students. Generally, we have resources to provide an appropriate learning experience for each child, and we are not running short on caring as we support our students. We believe that it is the community's expectation that we create an environment where each student feels like they belong at school so that each student can develop to their full potential. And that is what we will continue to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll just say that that's been the guiding light of every board as well that I've been part of in the 10 years that I've been here. So I'm so proud of the work that we've done in those areas. Diversity, equity, inclusion. Every student deserves as customized education as they can get for their, for their need. And I used to like to say, I wish every student could have an IEP, because every student is so important. Every student learns differently, has different needs, is coming from a different background. And the work that we've done here is just stellar. And I will be fully committed to it continuing for as long as I stay on the board, for sure. So thank you for all that hard work.
Well said, Mike. Well said.
Thank you.
All right, we have no visitors remaining.
So we're going to move into closed session for the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees, specific individuals who serve as independent contractors in a park, recreational, or educational setting, or specific volunteers of the district or legal counsel for the district, including hearing testimony on a complaint lodged against an employee, a specific individual who serves as an independent contractor in a park, recreational, or educational setting, or a volunteer of the district or against legal counsel for the district to determine its validity. Do I have a motion?
So, who was that?
Sherelle and Mike.
I'll second.
Sherelle and Mike.
Sherelle Fuller. Aye. Mike Davenport.
Aye.
Christopher Espinoza.
Aye.
Jenny Hagstrom.
Aye.
Terry Pavasich. Aye. Joanna Vasquez Drexler.
Aye.
And Nancy Kupka.
Aye. We're going to go in closed session. We will be returning only to adjourn. No additional action will be taken. So our students can go and enjoy the rest of their evening.
So can the administration?
The administration can go enjoy the rest of their evening. We thank you all.
Bye.
And this will be very short. Are you going to be here for a few minutes?
Yeah.
Okay.